what they do, they ask you to fill out what your general ledger balance is, what your detail is, and report a variance. If there is a variance in your reconciliations, they will use that and hit your free cash for it. Revenue and expense activity, that's reviewed by the town accountant for all funds. The state also requires us to put in some snow and ice deficit data and also a long-term debt schedule. So if you think about it, we have to put in balance sheets, debt schedules, cash receivable reconciliations. We really kind of have to circle the wagons on all the financial transactions of the town. And if you talk about that, you're like, well, what does that entail? How long is that? Well, to start with, if you looked at our total fund structure under, uniform municipal accounting system, we have approximately 250 funds. Now, probably, if I had to take a swipe at it, probably 60 or 70 might be trust funds. There's a trust fund account for principal. There's a trust fund account for the expendable interest. But I listed just the 8 major kind of areas: general fund, gifts, revolving funds, grants, enterprise funds, trust funds, CPC, and agency. And if you looked at all of those funds, the money in and the money out, for FY22, we're pretty much near 225 million in total transactional volume. And I can reconcile that quickly for you. If you look at the ALG plan, 108 million, I think it was, FY22, that, on the spend side, you double that, you get to 216, and then you add in enterprise funds and CPC, and you're well at the 225 million. So at the end of the day, the town accounting division has to review approximately 250 funds and approximately $225 million worth of activity. And this is submitted to the state. The way we like to do it, legally you can pay bills until July 15th, the way the accounting works. The state says, well, okay, you can have a FY22 warrant up until July 15th for the prior year. So we end up paying bills through July 15th. And then usually for the next 4 or 5 weeks, you can use words like review or scrub the records. We literally are looking around for issues. For example, hey, did we charge the whole CPC admin article for all of our admin? Did we remember to allocate interest income to all enterprise funds, because we work in a pooled cash environment? So we pretty much spend July 15th through August 31st really looking through the records. I guess we're looking for problems. We're looking for things that don't look right. We're looking for patterns and trends that don't make sense. We're looking for grant deficits that we need to make sure the department head is chasing. So and again, town accountant Lisa Wojcik, and I've worked with Lisa for over 20 years, and Lisa does a great job with this. And this is it's a real undertaking. In terms of, all right, what floats around that could impact our free cash? Well, you start talking about replenishment, and you're like, well, how would it be replenished, or maybe negative replenished? Well, local receipts greater than or less than budget will produce an impact. A closed article, assuming we voted an article at town meeting and its intent has expired and there's some money left, the town accountant will annually review a general fund article list with the town manager and make any adjustments. I call it statutory adjustments. The Department of Revenue, changes in receivables. They look at our receivable swing because it's a balance sheet calculation, kind of a liquidity test. So if there are any changes in receivables, DOR will adjust for that. Miscellaneous revenue, municipal budget turnback, and grant deficits, all of these items can have an impact. Again, what you're used to hearing is, there's a budget turnback. Well, that's just one piece. There's a budget turnback. There's a revenue component. And then again, there's some of these things in the weeds, changes in receivables, changes in grant deficits. And over the decades, the state has had some interesting things. One year they said if you're involved in a self-insured health insurance trust fund, and that entity had a fund balance deficit, not for the year, but in general, they would hit your free cash for it. Now that's going back a while, but we are, as the committee knows, we exist because the state allows us to exist. So we're a political subdivision of the state, their rules apply. So again, there hasn't been a lot of surprises maybe the last 5 or 10 years on this in terms of, different things jumping up that they want us to account for. And the last slide I have is the last 5 years free cash numbers, and that is not a misprint. 6/30/19 and 6/30/2020 being the same number. It's just kind of how the chips fell. So those are the last 5 years, the free cash numbers. I'm sorry about the brevity of the presentation. But again, I guess the one thing that I'd like to leave the committee with is the town accounting division is reviewing approximately $225 million of total transactions for fiscal 22 that are spread out into about 250 funds. And the other thing is these submissions. Years and years ago, the submissions would be in Excel. We'd send in the balance sheets and that would be it. Not anymore. There is a DOR gateway system. These submissions have to be on their forms, on their templates, with different sign-offs from different municipal officials. So, it's been tightened up, somewhat. But again, that's really all I had prepared for the certification process. If there's any questions.
Steve, thank you very much for that. We'll start on the left and work our way around. Roland, do you have any questions? Christine?
Hey, Steve. Give an example of miscellaneous revenue.
Yeah, so that could be a workers' comp dividend, because we get on some of the insurance policies, they, like they'll estimate a premium. So the way workers' comp goes is they'll say, okay, you have 19 million in payroll. Okay, that's the number we give them. They base the premium on that. They'll come out every year and do an annual audit, and then they'll come in and they'll say, oh, it was 18,850. So we owe you 150,000 times the rate difference, and something like that. So mostly insurance refunds. Sometimes you can get a refund from a vendor. Now, usually those refunds will go into miscellaneous. If somehow, we cut a check to the vendor and we had to return somehow the check comes back to us. That would be miscellaneous revenue. I'm trying to think. Most of the other items, I'm trying to think. Austin Sagana was just doing a great job for the town. Sale of surplus property. I'm not sure if there's a line on the recap on local receipts for that, page 3, but that could be a miscellaneous revenue as well, Steve.
Okay, thanks.
Christine?
And what is a grant deficit?
So a lot of the grants in our line of work are reimbursement based, which means, okay, town, you've been awarded a $200,000 grant. It's reimbursement based, so you upfront the money, you pay for the cost, you submit your paperwork and your invoices and your backup, and we'll see if you're eligible for reimbursement. And the only thing that happens is timing. So if we get a grant in the spring, a department head goes and spends it, and they don't do the reimbursement until July, technically grant deficit exists. The only thing that's kind of strange to me on grant deficits, and it's just kind of a little side note, it's most of these grants are from the state. So the state is holding money back on free cash in case the state doesn't pay us. So, it's statutory accounting, but a lot of the grants in this line of work are reimbursement based.
Mike? David? Isha? So I was just curious about when you were describing the July 15th, July 30th deadlines. So does that mean that if we have a bill, we don't pay it by July 15th, it then accrues into the next fiscal year, or same as a receivable as well?
So, what we monitor all our vendors. The department heads do a great job of watching out over their vendors. So normally, again, we try to get the department heads to make sure they get all their vendor bills in by July 15th of the current year. If that doesn't happen, we try to work through that, but ideally everybody's bills for the current year, unless there's a purchase order. We'll put a purchase order in. If you do a purchase order, because that's been happening a lot where, say IT, they'll order some things in June, and then the vendor will call and say, it's sitting on a container, it's going to be a while. Well, state law allows if you order it in June or in that fiscal year, as long as you have a purchase order and you recognize that expense in that year, you can pay it in the subsequent year using the prior year PO. So that's state laws. That's the state law way of kind of working with the vendors, making sure you get a purchase order in.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the time you put into the presentation.
Thank you very much.
No other questions then for Steve? Okay. So we will move on to the point of view and continue working on it. Should I just turn it over to you then, Kristen?
Sure. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, so I will start off by saying that I took no notes at our last meeting because I was going to go back and watch the video and get all of your comments through the video. And ActonTV reached out a couple days later and apologized profusely, but unfortunately our last meeting was not actually recorded. So I went off my memory, and if you have to say something a second time, I apologize, but please don't hesitate to make comments, even if you've said them before, because I'm sure I have missed quite a few of the things. Okay. I'm just going to let you guys read it and then comment, and we'll move on when we're ready.
Any comments from left or right?
I like it.
My only comment might be to put a little bit of substance in here, but
I think
I'm going to leave the comment at that for the moment.
Okay, yeah, no, I purposely didn't. It's because the substance is following.
Got it.
But it's sort of an overview of what we're going to cover.
Okay.
So spending wise.
I think I figured out what was bugging me on the previous slide. We're not telling a story. We are visually telling a story, but we're expecting people to understand what that story is.
I think we're expecting to speak to these slides.
You're right. I like slides that you don't have to speak to.
Oh,
also, no, I don't want all the information on the slides.
Oh, okay.
And we do need to speak to the slides, but I want someone to be able to walk away and really remember what the message is. So I especially would like the titles to be more pointing people in the direction.
What do you mean by titles?
The tops.
So have like the conclusion of the slide. Is that what you mean? Like the title be more descriptive?
Yes, more of what we want the takeaway to be
Yeah.
in the name, the big letters at the top.
Okay. All right, we can definitely work that out. So I think this tells a good story that we can speak to, which is just based on the April 22nd ALG projections. Again, this is a projection of revenue. We need to be clear. Everything beyond FY23 is a projection of expected costs, and the Minuteman ones at the bottom being a small sliver, but also having relative to each other a big increase, but something we don't have a lot of control over as well. We end up with a $5 million gap in FY26 if we budget to those projections.
What is the solid line? Is that revenue?
Is the arrow with the word revenues not? Should I make it bolder, or what do you think?
I would make the word revenue bolder.
This, okay. No, I didn't mean to do that, sorry. Sure, yeah, no, I can try to make that more obvious or colorful or, clear.
And I'll also throw out for the committee that when we're working on the point of view, I think it's helpful. Just feel free to speak up anytime you have an idea. I don't think anybody's going to step on anybody's toes. So.
What do you got?
Yeah, just the delta there, the deficit, or whatever phrase you want to use. It might be, I understand what it means, but it might be captured better with like a little difference between the two, sort of pointing out the dollar amount or something to that effect.
Are you talking about this dollar amount, or
Yeah.
making it more obvious, or explaining what it is, or?
Yeah, well, yeah, that for starters.
Yeah.
I mean, you could just call it deficit or something, shortfall or whatever.
For that type of chart, you can have an option where you can put a table on the bottom.
Probably in PowerPoint, not in Google Slides, but I can add one. I can shrink this down and add one.
So I have a follow-up question to David's comment, which is if we look at fiscal year 24, 25, 26, the deficit of 2.44 and 5.2, does that represent the red, which is above the revenue line? Okay.
Yes, but
There's
it's
obviously not enough room to put it above the revenue line. I just wanted to, I don't know if you can put it even above it might make more sense to just out of placement to tell the story that it's that gap up there, but I'm not going to pick at that. I'm just saying. There's obviously no space for it.
Right, I could put it, right.
FY20.
Yeah.
You have 3.9.
It's from the ALG plan.
We covered all of our expenses in FY20.
And have we not closed that?
I will verify those numbers with Steve.
Thank you.
But I pulled all those numbers from the ALG plan.
And this
That's just how it's.
slide might change if and when one of our first ALG meetings.
If they change projections. Yes, as the ALG plan changes, but I mean, this is a snapshot.
Yep.
So
Great. Otherwise, fine.
I think Mike's was also blinking.
What's blinking?
Oh, their mics are blinking.
Does that mean
Everybody in this one? Well,
Yeah, that one's blinking too.
this one's blinking too.
Interesting.
Yell.
Okay. Any more comments on this slide?
Okay.
I'll just talk very loud.
That'll be great for when I watch the video back for the comments. So then continuing on with the spending conversation, obviously the big things are projected revenues versus expenses. One of our biggest expenses is compensation. We've had these numbers in here before. The highlighted 74 is because it's not updated yet, and it's just a reminder to me to update it. The updated, I wonder if they were resetting. Sometimes they do that.
It works now, Christy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The 79.6 on the school side is updated, and it is an increase. But I included the bullet point under it because it's an increase, not because salaries went up. They actually cut staffs so that salaries would not go up, but fringes went up so much because of the health insurance trust and the Middlesex Trust increase that it still resulted in an overall increase to 79.6% of their budget.
And where does this number fall for the entire budget for both municipal and I assume it's right around between 74 and 79, so about 76.
Typically,
77.
yeah. Throughout the years, they typically hover one that's 74, one at 76, and so they average out to about 75.
That might be a number you could throw right at the end of the first bullet point. Compensation is our largest budgetary item at 76%, and then give the breakdown.
Sure.
Again, not something you have to do, just a suggestion. Go.
I had to read this number sentence a few times because I was thinking about something else when you were talking. Could we change it to make it a little more clear that in spite that there were staffing cuts, but there were also these increases?
Sure. I'm sure, yeah. This was the first step. I'll find a way to reword
Like something
it.
like, in spite of savings from staffing cuts, we had these other increases.
Do you suggest? Does work. So do you suggest that it says this number includes, do you think that should be bigger?
I thought the point of what Christine was saying earlier was that this is in the context of they tried to keep this number down. Like, this isn't just that.
If we want, I can even split out. Dave Bertolini gave me the two numbers, the salaries and the fringes. If we really want to, we could show last year's versus this year's, where despite the fact that obviously contracts have built-in pay increases, the pay itself is static because of the cuts they made. So I could try to find a way to show that. And that the reason we went from something like 76% to 79.6% is because despite that, the health insurance.
That would be
is
good with
less
one of
much.
the addendums.
Yeah,
Maybe,
we're not.
I don't know. The point of this slide, honestly, either way, is compensation is our biggest budgetary item.
Yeah.
What's left is very little to fight over as far as where that money's going to go, which is, I think it's good to include, but I didn't want to just include that they went up to 79.6%.
Well, no one knows they have. I mean, we're not putting context on this slide.
Yes, this is true, but we're going to speak to it.
We could say above compensation is our largest budgetary item. Never mind. I was going to say in spite of FTE cuts, but that's not.
Yeah.
I worry a little that you're getting into too much detail there. Because you do say below about the increase in healthcare and retirement.
Is expected to continue. Yes. I think that I want to make sure in here that we address citizens' concerns about school budgeting. I don't know what the town's budget, municipal salary and fringes is going to come in at with their own increases in HIT and Middlesex, but I just want to make sure we're telling the story of what's driving the current percentage.
The town's going to have the same HIT percentage and pretty close to the same Middlesex percentage.
Right, but I don't know what that will add up to in their salary and fringe numbers. What I'm saying.
So, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Now, what is the timing of their contracts, renegotiations?
I know that they are having the teachers' contracts discussed, at the end of this summer.
So this could change based on the.
Not FY23.
Our goal with the point of view this year is to get it done by late August, early September, so that we can present it to the school committee in the town. We were asked by Peter Light if we could have that so that the school committee could consider our thoughts before they develop their budgetary subcommittee, and I think before they do their negotiations. I'm not certain. Go ahead.
That gets off my button. If they renew in whatever month it is, won't it have a big bump for
Not until FY24 is my understanding.
inflation? You won't have any?
It will not show up until FY24's budget. So
Right.
while that is important to our discussion, that will not change this number.
FY23 is already set and paid for.
What?
Is already set and paid for.
Okay.
Okay. So, in some of the comments you made, Christine, you articulated the story, in my opinion, which I thought was very poignant, which is, this is the biggest chunk of the budget. What's left after this is what we're fighting for. And I think what would be a very interesting next slide is, here's the list of things that are fighting for the last 24% that's left in the budget.
Yep.
in parallel with that, I would like to see what that dollar number is that we get with the Prop 2.5 and the expected growth, et cetera. What is the expected revenue growth that fits within not having an override? And then maybe add on to that a bullet point of what our free cash is that we think is reasonable level to spend. So people can see, here's the projection, which we show that number, and here are the resources that we as FinCom think are available for that.
I like that story.
Okay.
I think that speaks to guidance, right? Which I think is the purpose of the FinCom presenting this to the budgetary parties while they still have time to work on their budgets for the ALG process. Okay. Anything else on this slide?
No. So this sort of gets back to, that this little graph in the corner is the one that shows where we exceed our revenues. This is what happens if overall we have a 3% increase. That being said, it's not 3% across the board because, again, we can't control what Minuteman does.
Mm-hmm.
So all other entities have to consider what Minuteman takes, and then from there we average a 3% increase. And again, still projecting revenues, not actual revenues.
So one comment I'd like to make about this slide, and then the entire point of view in general, which is that given the current climate where it doesn't appear that we're at any risk of needing an override this year, and it's questionable whether or not an override is important next year, I think the story should be more one of, here's where our money comes from, Prop 2.5. Here's where our spending is going. And so on this slide in particular, we could change the verbiage so that instead of saying to avoid an override, say this is what needs to happen with the budget to stay within the Prop 2.5 and refer everything back to Prop 2.5. That would be my goal.
Given the number of discussions we've had in my house about Prop 2.5, it is hard for people to understand.
So maybe slide 1 needs to be the explanation.
Right, it can be. We're already adding more slides. Just saying, trying to keep it slim, and we're already talking about adding more slides.
I get it.
So I would be happy to say within revenues, because it's not just Prop 2.5, it's Prop 2.5 plus new growth.
Sure.
And
I think
local
that's,
yeah, exactly.
I
Local
feel
receipts
that's
and
a
all that.
very important first step in the story. And I think also because I still get the sense that so many people in the community don't understand Prop 2.5. And I know it took me a solid year and a half on the Finance Committee before I even understood it. And maybe I still don't understand everything there is to know about it. So we can talk offline about that. But I think that's the good setup for the story.
Okay.
Okay.
On this slide, do these bars include the Minuteman?
Yes.
So this includes what we already know about Minuteman?
Yes, so this would include, nothing has changed in those bars. That's not true, I lied. I added up all of those numbers and made them grow at 3% instead.
So why aren't they higher than the revenue? If Minuteman is way higher than 3%.
I made them all grow at 3% instead,
Yeah,
because
what I'm
it's an
saying,
average.
Can we take Minuteman and make it be what they've told us it will be? And figure out the percent for the other two entities?
Sure.
Yeah, I think there should be actuals.
That's
in
really
here
what
that
we're
we
dealing
already
with,
know.
right?
Yeah, no, that's a really good idea.
Knowns should be in here. Yep.
Yep, that's a really good idea. So this will be stacked with Minuteman and whatever's left.
And so the 3% number will change.
Yep.
So then it would be.
Well, it says combined budgets, so it'll be excluding Minuteman, combined
Yeah,
budgets,
IDRSD
and then it'll
and-
be less than 3%.
But I think yeah. So we'll combine AVRSD and municipal. So, okay, great.
Okay. So the second item on that first overview was tax bills. Tax bills have increased a lot.
I also think this is interesting. If you look at the median home value in the last 4 years, or 5 years in this case, right? That the value is up almost 200,000.
And that drives
Yeah.
reassessment. So
Right,
until
so-
someone sells, it's actually a tax burden rather than,
Yeah, it's up
Positive.
184,000, right. It's right, it's exactly what it is, unless you're selling.
yeah.
So my recollection from the last meeting was that, and I could be wrong, don't quote me, but I thought we were going to remove home value
Yep.
and make the slide just about median household income versus the median household tax bill.
We got rid of effective tax rate.
Yep.
We got rid of the average single family
Mhm.
because we couldn't, that was something we stopped using. And the average the tax bill is percentage of income based on single family or whatever there were two other, so there were three lines we got rid of.
I think we should get rid of home value.
Do we think home values tells anything here in the story? I don't.
Only because I added as well as property reassessments. And the property reassessments are because of that value. You know, there was a point where Brian said that home values had grown to a point that even though it wasn't on cycle to reassess, we had to reassess houses. And so taxes were going to go up that year.
For those people only.
Sure, but that's part of the 900 average.
It just gets,
I can take it out. I'm just saying that's why I left it in.
I don't know that it tells anything in the story unless somebody can convince me otherwise. Roland?
Well, I think it tells it part of the story. I agree with Christine on this, because if your home's been reassessed and they say your home value is now $724,333, and only in FY18, right, July 17 to June of 18, it was only 540.
So that becomes part of new growth.
no.
No, new growth is, you have a lot, Newtown Road down here, right? They put in, I don't know how many homes are going there, 6, 8 homes, whatever. And they're at 1.4 mil apiece. That's new growth.
Right.
Those are all new to the tax roll this year. The ones up at Narrow Ridge, all new. There's 10 homes in there, they're $1 million each. They're
Major
all new
renovation.
growth. Or major renovation, right? If Christie decides that she's gonna cut her house and redo it and make it all modern and fancy and all that stuff, and the company says, well, your house before was $724,333, it's now worth $1.5 million, and she gets assessed at 1.5. You know, so that's because of.
But we all get reassessed regularly.
Correct.
Assessment or home value for assessment only determines the piece of the pie you owe. So your home value is only a distraction on here because it's not realized value. Doesn't
No.
matter what my house is worth until I go to sell it.
Well,
Right, but it's driving the $900 per year on average.
No, it's not.
It's in there. It's in my formula. Whatever
Why?
the town assessed me is more than it might have, more than it would have been for somebody with a home value of
Yes,
who's
which is,
grown
that's the
less.
size of your wedge.
Yeah.
Right.
But where our wedges are all generally growing proportionally.
Yeah, I agree with Christie. The home value is not what's driving the tax bill. It's the Prop 2.5 that's driving the tax bill, and the tax rate on the home, as Brian explained it to it, is just a backfill. They calculate it based on here's what we can get from Prop 2.5. Here's what we have to assess it on homes at current home value. But my question to Brian, if he was here, would be, in the event like this year where home values have spiked, 10, 15% in a very short period of time, are we actually able to collect more than the 2.5%? That's why I was thinking, does that become new growth? Where does that extra, because the assessment's already made, right? We're paying some rate, and if our home value is up.
What drives your tax bill is budgets and spending. Assessments are how we apportion the pie between all the residents. And yeah, yours can change. And in theory, the tax rate falls if everybody's assessment went up, but the budget didn't. Again, in theory. On the other hand, I live in a place I haven't done much to for the last 8 years, and it's doubled in value. So.
Yeah, so that makes, the household income versus the household tax bill a very relevant proportion. And other people should chime in if they have an opinion about this, but I agree with Christie. I think the home value doesn't tell the appropriate story, I don't think. But
Okay.
someone can convince me otherwise.
Yeah, also, so this says it has increased an average of $900 for the past 4 years. Actually, the increases have gone on for the past 9 years, if you include the one coming up.
I had the data there, and I used that data there. So I didn't
What?
go back 9 years. Do you have the average for the last 9 years?
I think it was almost 900 last year.
Yeah, but,
I can give you that number.
okay.
I'm sorry, the 900 is also for the median tax bill?
It's the median tax bill growth.
Yeah, it's not that everyone's tax bills have.
No, it's the average
I'd
of that
stick that.
median tax bill growth.
I think that needs
Yeah.
to be clear.
Sure, okay.
Okay. I think we should all maybe take a show of hands on whether we should leave the home
I think
value
we're-
in there.
I think we're good.
Or is it dead issue? Okay.
I think it's the craziness of the increase in these home values that is really driving a lot of this economy. So I think you need to include it.
Well, but it may be in a different slide, but I don't think it is a driver of our tax bills. Our home value is not a driver. It's really just, as Christy pointed out, it's how the town decides who's paying which portion. It's not a driver per se.
Are you saying that's because it's part of inflation?
Yes.
But that's not in this slide, sadly. I mean, not sadly, that hasn't occurred in these fiscal years.
What hasn't occurred?
The high inflation right now that we are experiencing is not in fiscal year 18 through 22.
You don't think those houses have increased
I don't,
by unreasonable amount back in FY18?
if you're going to believe in a market, no. I think we are going to see significant effects of inflation going forward. I think it's going to muddy our discussion about
Well,
inflation.
I don't think it's so much
Confuse that.
inflation as in just the crazy demand for a home in Acton with a good school system.
And I think that is distracting from the argument we're trying to make here, which is that tax bills have gone up.
Agreed. And with interest rates rising, these houses in the next year or two will start decreasing in value potentially as well. So, okay.
Jesse? Okay.
So the second bullet point says below our recommendations. Do we have an official, or have we ever voted an official recommendation, or is this just the governing body for the school district's recommendation? It's not DOR. I always forget what it's
I think it is the OR, actually.
DOR.
Well, DOR is a ceiling. They have a recommendation of around 5%. Of course, you
Okay.
can't go over 5%. So you can only stay in good standing if you stay really, really near to 5%. And then our general unvoted on yet, but I believe pretty consistent recommendation has been that they move towards what we recommended for the town. So we might want to make that official this year and present it to them. And
Yes, and perhaps before we get to
Codify
such a
that.
presentation. We could probably take a motion and a vote on that now, but let's save it for another meeting. Okay.
Good.
I don't love the use of reserves for free cash. The second you say reserves, based on our previous discussions, I think free cash and stabilization.
I said that I've got free.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if the title of the slide is going to be reserves, it should show everything that's in reserves, which
Yeah. I have just put town free cash and ABRSD
and
and
we'd be
E&D.
right back in the discussion we've had many times.
Let's not go there.
It's fine. I'll just remove the reserves from the bullet points.
So I would change the title of the slide to free cash and E&D.
Okay.
I wouldn't.
Another.
Did you say you wouldn't?
I wouldn't. I actually like the
You
way
like
that.
it? You like the reserves? Okay.
No. Given what we just said, if it's only using A&D below, yeah, I'm good with it.
So
the
you're
way
okay
it is.
with the title that says reserves? Show of hands?
I'm also okay with it saying just free cash.
We've had discussions before that what we are almost always talking about is free cash, not the
Right.
entirety of reserves, because the town doesn't actually have reserves as they legally exist. But
And Jason,
It is
it's not
how
here to argue.
all of us refer to them.
Yeah.
When we talk about the town and we say reserves, we almost always mean free cash. When we talk about the school, we almost always mean E&D. And when we want to include stabilization, we usually say that.
So we might clarify this by, you can leave the title of the slide as reserves, but then on each of the bullet points, I would remove the word reserve.
Yes, that's
We're
what
talking
I,
about.
yeah,
Okay,
that was what I
you're
said.
ahead of me.
Okay. Yeah, I agree.
All right.
Yeah, you're talking free cash and stabilization.
Yeah, no, free cash and E&D
I
on that
have a
one.
thought for this slide. In the next 1 to 5 years, we're going to have the water treatment plant, which, while it is not part of the budgets, is a significant addition to everyone's bill for living in the town. We'll also have something else coming up.
Are you talking about the wastewater treatment?
No, the water,
The new.
the wastewater was the
PFAS
other one, but the PFAS treatment, the North Acton pumping station.
And that is a whole other bill.
Yes, but if we're looking at, as citizens, what is our tax bill?
But
That
we're
isn't,
not the finance committee for the water
I
district.
understand, but the citizens who are looking at our recommendations on what this should be relative to their budgeting, and the select board and the school committee need to understand that we have big bills simply for being citizens. It is a bizarre side effect of our town that water is not part of what we pay through it, that the infrastructure of the water system.
I mean, we can note it parenthetically or footnote it, but it's a different entity, it's a different revenue source. It's not coming out of their tax bill.
I
They're getting
understand that,
the
but it's
bill.
not.
But we can also speak to it
Yeah.
when we present.
I also think we need the wastewater treatment plant on there, which again, that's only a subset of our town. It is on their tax bills, I believe.
Well, and we voted on that 2 town meetings ago for $6.5 million. My understanding is that the cost is now also higher than that, and it should be in the capital project plan, should it not?
Wastewater is sewer, it's an enterprise fund.
Okay, so that, well, but not the portion of it that we voted through town warrant. Right?
It's not general.
It's not general
It's
fund.
not general fund.
Oh,
It's a user financed,
the whole $6.5 million for the plant.
Yeah.
Pump restoration and all that. Okay.
I would like a subsection then, somewhere, mentioning that there are these large expenses coming for parts of the population. I mean, the water, I understand why you don't want it on here, but water is everywhere in town, and it's gonna be a big increase in our bills.
Okay. We'll find a place for it.
Thank you.
So there was a formatting question with the way I had it before. Is everybody okay with this as far as how to display the numbers and the items? Okay.
Yeah.
And I know that John Mandrati mentioned last night at the select board meeting that he'll be updating the CIP shortly, so we'll want to make sure we're up to date on any revisions that are made to it when the new revision comes out.
Okay.
I recognize the importance of, or the elegance of having it in decreasing monetary value. The DPW building, as I understand it, is not anytime soon, and that number is not.
It's in the capital improvement project in the 1 to 5 year frame. So I can break this down into shorter time frames, but if we're looking at 1 to 5 years,
Because it's right next to 1 to 5, and it's the first thing on the list. My thought is, okay, that's 1 year out, we're doing that big thing, and then we're going from there.
I can put it in alphabetical order.
Yeah, I think it actually looks neater the way that you have it. I don't think there's any point in breaking it down by, 1 year,
Shorter
2 year,
timeframes.
whatever.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important for people that we're presenting this to see what are the biggest things that are coming in that 1 to 5 year time span. We could, if you wanted to, we could do a 1 to 2 or a 1 to 3 and then a 3 to 5.
Because we're talking, the 17 million we're talking in a year or two. That's a big difference from the 31 million. That's a not at all set in stone number. That'll happen someday.
It's true. It's
So-
true, but it's all happening in the next 5 years.
My main planning source is that capital improvement plan. And that's where it's listed. If that changes, I will update this, if it changes before we go to print, or as it were.
So one thought I had was you could actually put like a timeline on top, like just a bar with 1 to 3, 3 to 5, and 5 years on, and then just put the projects underneath them.
I could try that. I'll see if I can make that happen.
So, now a thought on that, to do it in either a list or a graphical way that does put it on a timeline could be interesting, because then it could show you sort of in a bar graph status how big it gets in which years. If you knew which years these things were.
Well,
It's still a
Right.
plan,
It's
right?
still, yeah.
It's still a plan, and it has
We
to
don't-
be approved, selected by the select board, and
Yeah.
approved,
So
and voted on, and warranted, and
And it has to go to town meeting and all that stuff too, so
Oh,
this
yeah.
is,
When people buy things at town meeting, oh, but that doesn't, yes. When we get to that, Mike's pointing out that it should go on the slide with the bars where the debt disappears. And then we have,
Excluded, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where the graph should be. I'm
saying
Very happy
when
with
we
this.
choose to buy things in town meeting because some property is coming up for sale, people don't have a context of what the other things coming in a time range. So I would love to give people an idea of, okay, right now we're talking about putting, I thought it was 7 million worth of sidewalks in the next
that's
2
just,
years.
that's just the plan.
Yes, but if it's what they're thinking, people need to have a concept of, I'm going to ask for this, but they're thinking of these 5 other things too.
where if you walk up towards your house, right, going across the property across the street, the sidewalks right there are in terrible shape.
That sounds expensive.
But you can't just keep building new sidewalks and not keep up the infrastructure that you have. That's my point.
This list was when they did the CIP. Did they create any kind of priorities? If you should have the number one priority projects as like certain, and then everything under that is uncertain.
You could put this in order by the priority list that the select board sets. But I still think you would find that their current priority list includes most, if not all, of these items, and still within the next 1 to 5 years. So we're right back in the same boat.
I like Tisha's idea. See what you can do with the timeline.
I'm not sure having the 5 to 30 year category does much. We don't have numbers associated with them.
Well, we know Conan's going to be upwards of 99 million.
We don't.
Yeah. The average age of people who go to town meetings is around 60, 30 years is not going to be a great concern to them.
I like the 5 to 30 year things. I like that it's a short list with only 3 items, because those are all going to be very big items. Oh, sorry. And Christine, the very last bullet point, if we decide to leave it, fire stations, just drop the S off of fires.
Oh, yeah,
That's all.
definitely.
Okay. I think we've probably spent enough on this slide.
Well, just one last point.
Maybe not.
This slide only covers the capital improvement plan, which covers 1/3 of the town's budget, right? So there's 2/3 of the picture here missing.
From the school side, you were saying?
Yeah.
And we don't get a CIP plan from the school.
But one exists, I'm pretty
We
sure.
could say that. Can we
No,
put
no, they have
How
one.
about if I just ask for their most
Okay.
recent CIP
There you
plan?
go.
I thought they had a website for it.
Yeah, JD ended up creating one.
Okay.
It's actually, or Peter Light. It's.
I thought they had one that came out like 2 years ago or a year ago that we all saw.
And it was good, and it was going to have rolling updates. And we did
Right.
that.
Okay, good.
Exactly.
So we should create a slide for that.
Sure.
Matches this.
Good point.
Thank you, David.
This really hasn't changed at all. If we want to move to the longer out one that we had in last year's presentation, we definitely can do that. I just put it here because I feel like the story we tell is these are the upcoming projects that are on the list. These are items that we have identified that are going to need our time and attention. And even if we end up putting them off at some point, we're probably going to need to pay for these things. This is what our current debt service looks like. So everything we do after 2026 brings that number back up. So I think it's just part of telling the story. Is the last of the
Parker Damon rolls off in 2025.
town, Parker Damon, and part of the ABRSD roll off. Yeah. Yeah, it's the high school updates and things like
The
that.
junior high and all
Yeah,
that stuff,
yeah,
so
yeah.
that rolls off, so that's,
Yep. So the number drops down to almost where it was before we bonded the new school and the fire station. So,
But I think there's more than enough on that prior slide to get us back up there.
Yeah, I would,
that's
that's
kind
something.
of my point of sticking it right here, because then after that, we speak to, what our recommendations are.
Do we want to put something on that side to the effect of excluding new debt? Like pending new debt or something?
You can
We have
say
this,
excluding everything on this slide before.
Exactly.
there you go, that one.
Yes. And then,
This is really weak response to the story we've just told.
I'm open to whatever verbiage we would like to have. These have been, we asked them to identify future capital projects that would need our attention. They did. They put them in an estimated timeline. It's not written in stone, but they're identified projects. And so, there's only so much we can do to say, don't do these, or, they haven't prioritized them or put them in front of us yet. So I don't know how much I want to pre-argue when they did what we asked them to do.
I was thinking we could make a recommendation of level. Because you talked earlier about how our tax bills have gone up so much, and we all know we got a huge jump when we put the twin school debt out there. It is about to roll off. Do we want to recommend that it not go above the current level? Do we want to have any sort of recommendations?
I think that I don't know what that number would be, but I think that might be too strict, because that doesn't really give them a lot of room to do some
you
of
go
these
back
things that are really we may come along and they might give us a presentation for the DPW, and we might say, actually, you really need to do that.
Can we go back to the previous one, please? I just want to get a concept of the Boardwalk campus is about what's going away. Is the Boardwalk campus, the North Acton Fire Station, and Minuteman is effectively what's dropping off. I'm just looking at the fact that it looks like 2026 is more or less half of 2025.
Mm-hmm.
It's reasonable to say that in 2026 we should not double our
Oh yeah, no, we definitely
debt
should not
service.
double.
Well, that's what maybe we should say by 2028 we should not have doubled our debt service.
That gives them a lot of leeway between where they are in doubling, though.
Well, what's the amount of principal we financed on the new twin school?
what do you know?
Thought it was more than that.
I thought it was like 46, 48 million, maybe it's more than that, maybe it's in
And I
the
thought that was the state.
state portion was, I thought it was 34 million.
What was the 113? Was
Where's
that the
Jason
total?
when you need?
Right?
113
So
was the
let's-
starting number that you have to take the MSBA piece out of.
I was just-
Throw out of.
Well, I was just looking at the Acton portion, I wasn't looking at,
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the Acton portion, but.
I thought it was somewhere in the 60s.
Steve,
okay.
what did we end up borrowing when we floated the debt? The debt on the Boardwalk campus, what did we end up bonding?
Oh, you'd have to talk to the schools about that. You mean the
The
rate?
town, our town specific. Oh, it went through the schools?
Yeah, it went through the town.
Oh, did it?
No, it didn't. Well,
Did we bond our portion or because I thought we floated a bond. That was not the
No.
town, that was the district.
We floated a bond for the North Acton Fire Station.
Yeah.
The school floats their own debt and sends us our share of the bill.
Thank you.
I'm just saying, if you go back to that list, there's probably easily the same number. DPW at 30, it's probably higher than that. Sidewalks at 17, you rapidly get into the 50, 60 million
Right.
range. So it could very easily take that bar graph back up to where it was.
So, go ahead, Mike.
The Boardwalk School, for example, that'll be on the books until 2051,
Yeah.
as will the fire station, as will Wait a minute.
And whatever we're doing in future debt service, because this is a debt service chart you're looking at, is going to have a much higher interest rate carrying cost than anything we did the last couple of years.
That's about 57,000.
But that's why I think that should be part of our recommendation. We could say, given inflation expenses and significantly increased interest rates, additional borrowing should be done sparingly.
Yeah, I think,
We're recognizing that the necessity for capital investment.
certainly in an effort to try to do no harm and make taxpayers higher than they necessarily need to be. I think the point Christie's trying to make is that we should come up with a recommendation or ask the borrowing parties to try to keep that graph steady at the very least, right? If possible. I don't think it's going to be easy to do. So we need to word that carefully, right?
Yeah, I hesitate to put any kind of hard number in there.
I just want more of a statement than we
Sure.
have, which is, as we've said for 4 years now, don't spend much.
Yep.
Can we move back to that slide, the
Yeah,
one after
sorry.
the,
I also recall that when we
Yep.
had the discussion about supporting the boardwalk project, ignoring that it was a necessity and it was the best way to do it, it was in the context of rolling off the step.
Yes, that things would only rise for 5 years and then come back down.
Yes.
Which they're going to.
Unless we come up with projects that will.
But again, looking at all of those, we don't know what's going to be funded by grants, what's going to be funded by outside funding, what's going to be funded by partnerships, what we're going to, the
Right.
final cost of anything is going to be. It's still all estimates, even though it's within 5 years.
I
So
would just love to see a statement saying, don't go spend it all right away.
I don't, we'll come
I'll
up
vote
with
for
something.
that.
Well-
I'd love to see it on this slide.
Yes.
and to bullet point 2, that could say continue to prioritize.
Sure, yep.
Because
Because that's
the
what they've.
CIP is
Yeah.
an excellent head start in that direction.
Yep,
And
I think it's a holdover from pre-CIP.
yeah, and I think if we don't say that, then it's almost like we're saying you're not doing that.
Yes,
Should we
yeah.
recognize
they
the
are.
CIP explicitly? Continue to work with the CIP?
Yeah, I mean, I can,
Yeah.
I can just change the wording on that third bullet, which basically says, yes, continue doing what you're doing with the.
Oh, yeah, so bullet 2 and bullet 1 kind of
Yeah.
go together. And then we can carefully think how we want to word. And regardless of what our recommendation as a finance committee is regarding future excluded debt, ultimately it's the taxpayers who will decide which projects they want to allow the town and the schools to go and do. So,
But this is where we make our recommendations.
yeah.
This
I
is
like
where
the
we
idea of
make-
flat,
yeah, this
trying
is-
to keep it flat.
This is where we make our recommendations, but we don't stop talking, right? I mean, we're here all year. If a project comes up, we can pull up the debt service slide and slap it on there and see what kind of impact it's gonna have.
This is where we make our recommendations to the school committee, who are paying a whole lot of attention to their hard job of managing the schools. And that's part of why we do all the stuff about what the town is doing. I just want to make sure no one walks away from that debt service chart saying, sweet,
Look at all the money we have to
look
spend.
at, we can rebuild Conant right now.
Well, why not just put that in the appendix? I agree. It just begs the question of, oh, look, we have some spare capacity here to spend. I don't know, I mean, just my view is on the slide is, we've had it historically part of our slide decks, but it does,
You mean the bar chart side?
yeah, where it goes up and then steps down.
And the story I'm continually hearing from all of you is that at the time that we took the money out for the boardwalk school, it was under the guise that once Parker Damon falls off, you'll all get a nice little tax break.
It was more part of the story was we're gonna bond it all up front rather than doing a slow pieces of bonds. We're gonna bond it all at this really low interest rate. You're gonna take a hard tax hit for like 5 years, but then it's gonna come back down almost to the level it was before we started. Not so much as you're gonna get a boon, but
Right.
just so you know, this is a 5-year big spike, and we recognize that it's finite, it's 5 years, it's not 30 years.
Okay, so that's the story I'm hearing repeatedly, and I think that's the story that we need to find a way to say explicitly. Go ahead, Roland.
So I think by bonding it all at once, right? Minuteman didn't do it that way. They did it in tranches,
Still doing it.
right? Still doing it, actually, correct. And that drove up the cost on the borrowing. As Steve will tell you, every time you go to the bond council to bond it, there's a cost to run that bond. That's why the town does bands and gets a bunch of things together and goes up with one bond, right? To lower the cost and divide that bond cost against all the projects. So that's why they went all at once and did that big chunk at once. We got a fantastic rate for that. I can figure out the rate the schools got. Or Steve did for the fire station. That was a low, what was that?
2 and change.
Yeah. Yeah, so if they did it in pieces, it doesn't make sense for smaller projects, but that's why they went all at once, and it made much more sense to do it that way.
So somewhere we need to tell that story. That here's what, and whether that's we as a finance committee told the taxpayers would happen, or whether it was the select board, or whether it was whomever, that
Schools.
story needs to be told.
Yeah, it was the schools.
Okay.
Okay, we had a lot of input on this slide, so let's,
Let me play devil's advocate on the first point. Is it unsustainable? How much can we all continue to keep paying?
$900 increases a year. I think
Infinity.
it's unsustainable. I think there'll be a revolt.
Infinity is the highest it could go.
Infinity plus plus.
You make it hard, right? I mean, it goes up, it keeps going up, it keeps going up. And I think the unsustainability part is people who are retired, they're gonna eventually say, I'm done. And they sell their house and a family moves in with 3 kids. The cycle starts all over again, right? I mean, heck, I'm looking at saying now, the cactus keep going the way they are, by the time I retire,
Well,
I want to bug
unless
out.
people who have kids decide not to come to Acton for those reasons. And that time is coming if we continue the way that we are, I think.
So I'd like to make a comment about the second bullet, which is similar to one I made in another slide. Let's remove the word override and say to carefully stay within Prop 2.5. Change that.
Within revenue.
Within revenue.
Sorry, within revenue, sorry.
I would like to propose that we add back in the pie chart that shows the households in the town, the percentage of which have kids in schools. So that, especially again, the school committee recognizes that we spend 66% on the budget on what is currently 27% of the households.
And you want that in the main body or back
Yes.
in the appendix with the rest of the
I want it in the main body. I have heard from a number of people that that is a powerful slide. And again, given that it is such a large portion of the budget, and that I've heard anecdotally that some members of the school committee are not paying as much attention to the town side of the taxes, that it would be helpful.
So do we all
for them to
agree?
see.
Show of hands. That's a good idea to put that slide back in. Seems like.
Yeah, I'll put it in,
Okay.
we can
All right.
see how it
Put the pie
flows.
chart back in on.
Do we want to discuss Steve's idea? I think it got glossed over on taking out that bar chart with the debt exclusion.
Oh, you want to take it out of where I put it in the appendix?
Yeah, I just thought, I mean, you made the original point of just telling a story, and if you go through the slide deck, then there's a couple things you can pick at, but that's one that you can put in the appendix. I don't think you lose anything unless there's a message to be delivered with it.
My only thought was that you've got the list of, capital improvement projects, and then the visual list of what's happening with our debt service, and then our recommendation that we be really careful about how we approach those projects, because we should protect that step down, and it's just visual for that.
Yeah, and then maybe the point is, this debt plan reflects currently approved projects, while all the prior projects are clearly, potential projects or future projects or whatever. And maybe, you could just draw a cloud over the debt service in the future saying, who knows where this number is going to go given where we were in the prior, given what we talked about in the prior slide.
Right. Yeah.
Storm cloud.
It looks like there's general interest in adding that slide back in.
Yeah, and again, just remove override terms. I would remove override terms from the entire plan.
What?
which
But
I'll
not
send
the
you
last
out
one.
later.
The one she just took out?
Yeah, there's no point in discussing. We're not.
Because it's not on
We're
the
not
table.
heading. Yeah.
We're not talking about necessarily 1 year out. This
Not
isn't,
at the current moment.
this is not purely recommendations on fiscal year 24.
It's true, but I would like to keep the verbiage staying within revenues. I'd like to keep it in that way. Because we all know what the alternative to not staying in revenues is.
We do, the people listening to this don't necessarily. I mean, I do, my sense is that we're going to be talking about one in a few years.
So let's talk about it then, I think.
I think we need to warn people that it's going to be part of the discussion coming up if things don't change. It puts a sense of urgency around this discussion. You can't just sort of ignore this. Okay, well, we're fine right now. It's like, no, we're heading to this place. And it's not just if we stay within, like, we're just a little bit over. I guess if we stay within, we don't get there. But if we're a little bit over, it's a problem. I don't want it to be like trying to lose weight for the 3 months before the wedding you're going to.
Right. I'm a little torn on how we should state it, whether we should at all.
No, I don't think you can ever say we shouldn't have an override too often.
Put another way, I don't want to be giving this presentation next year with this suddenly saying, yeah, now we're looking at an override, when we had said, I think there is one quite likely on the horizon if we don't.
Okay, I think it'd be very specific. We don't see a need for an override in fiscal 24. Be specific.
So maybe take the override term out of the second bullet point where it was, and maybe add back the last bullet you had about
I like to leave the last bullet point there.
Yeah, I mean, that was something we voted on in the statement.
I think it's statement, right?
I think your statement, if you can go back one.
Yeah.
Or I think really you have to put inflation and healthcare costs will remain high. I think you really have to acknowledge, and we as a town have to acknowledge that inflation and economic uncertainty will impact every aspect of our budget. Everything you eat, everything you drive, everything that you buy, everything that you build is going to be impacted in a very negative way by significant inflation and significant economic uncertainty. And I think you've got to acknowledge that it could be the elephant in the room. It's going to kill you. Just my opinion.
Along those lines, unless my high-level math is off, it is possible that the town cannot operate within 2.5 with inflation, et cetera. Things could cost more than natural growth. There could be a necessary budget increase that exceeds.
Yeah, look at that. You're not even talking about
someone
energy
please tell me.
cost here.
Someone please tell me if I'm wrong.
No, I agree with you. And the question at that point is going to be, what is the state, what is the federal government, what are we as a municipality going to do when that happens? Because I agree with you, it will come eventually. I've been thinking about that in my mind for the last couple of years. What happens when Prop 2.5 is no longer viable mathematically for a state, not just for any one town? And I suspect maybe legislation comes later to change it. I don't know. Go ahead,
Well,
Steve.
the first place you look, say, 24 or 25, is you look at the state, they're sitting on a ton of money. You know, can they increase the aid to the cities and towns? The next place you look is we will get extreme pressure on our reserve policy to, you know, say, let's go below 3% just this year. But of course, you'll never get it back. Third place you look is what former member Doug Tinley used to call puddles of money. Excess amounts in enterprise funds, turnbacks, unspent warrant articles, things like that. And then when all else fails, then you start looking at reductions in staff. So you can do it and stay within 2.5. It gets more painful with each of those steps that I just outlined.
Should that be part of our story too? Budgetary parties?
I don't think we have to be that directive.
Second to last bullet point, I think we should say storm clouds are on the horizon. A recession is possible.
It's not already here.
Right. But it means just saying that, you know, you're more or less pointing that out. That just makes it a little bit more poignant.
So my understanding is that while it's possible we're in or headed to a recession, that it is a strong possibility that for us, anyway, it's going to be a shallow recession because unlike in other times of recession, we have incredibly low unemployment. Anybody who wants a job has a job, pays have been increasing, there's inflation, but also people have more money in their pockets, spending is continuing. So I'm a little hesitant to get super doom and gloom here without more evidence.
There's actually been a significant shift in spending very recently towards necessities and away from a lot of the goods that have been fueling this growth. People are already eating out less because they're having to spend more of their budgets on gasoline and food and those other things. So I think...
And that's a story that people will understand when it presents it to
Yeah,
them, because
you're-
we're all looking at our bills.
You're saying lack of evidence. We can give you plenty of evidence on every single item.
The evidence is especially, I think, starting to show up.
I agree there's evidence of recession and that it's going to impact things. I'm just, again, what I'm seeing is a lot of forecasting that it won't be a deep recession, that it'll be a shallow recession.
I think,
How that affects us, time will tell.
I think the better story to articulate here is the personal story of, to the budgetary parties, even though you'd like to continue growing at whatever rate Prop 2.5 can afford you, or maybe you need to even grow faster than that, you're not only up against Prop 2.5, but you're up against a town full of taxpayers whose monthly bills are going up for other reasons already, who have less and less and less discretionary income, who are going to have less and less income to spend on higher taxes. So anything you want to do that's over Prop 2.5 is highly likely to fail in the future.
Inflation is a tax on the poor people and middle class. And it's here. And it's out of control. And we got to acknowledge that and prepare for it.
I think that's the next step in the story beyond just the Prop 2.5.
Maybe we don't say it specifically as a recession. That's getting at the broader idea that people might have trouble paying their bills. So maybe we say it explicitly as inflation is hitting taxpayer pocket. Rather
So
than
that's
the
more of a
recession is possible.
narrative, more of a narrative and less of a bullet point, right?
I'm recommending that we remove the recession as possible bullet point and replace it with that.
Second.
It's just saying it's possible to achieve.
No. inflation is high, and inflation is hitting pocketbooks, and inflation is here, not a recession is here, and that's what I'm changing it to, right?
Right, right.
Okay, I just want to confirm, because Mike said something different.
Increases in cost of living for all of the entire community
Okay,
are
so,
going to take away the amount of money that's potentially available over and above. Okay, sorry.
I just think for this iteration of this document, that third bullet might be best first, just because it is front of mind. And, you could almost conclude with the first bullet.
Could we take away the foreseeable future?
It's here, it's not, it's here.
It'll just remain high, period. I'm
That's
okay
not
with
my
that.
recommendation.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then you could even add a sub-bullet here as
that implies the future.
is something to the effect of, the link to the labor and the fringes and benefits and labor costs being the part of the budget. I think you'd just want them to infer that this is growing regardless and crowding out every other bit of spending that's out there.
okay, and I will rework this slide significantly based on the conversations that we've had today. What I'd like to do beyond that is send you all the appendix documents separately. Look them over, mark them up as needed, gather your thoughts about them. Feel free to email them just back to me, not discussing amongst yourselves. And then we'll kind of go over that at the next meeting rather than now. Is that okay with you, Adam?
That's okay with me. Do we have to state that any thoughts, changes, or recommendations that come back to you can only be on content and
Yeah, no.
factual data, not on
Yeah.
opinions?
Yeah, we're not going to go back and forth on them. You're just going to read it and mark up as you would like, and then we can go over those. And then the last thing I wanted to cover was that previously, and we talked to this last time, in prior point of views, we had this great data that was, and forgive the weirdness of these, town by town comparisons that had our average single family tax bill, the average family income. And with that data, we were able to make graphs of the tax bill as a percentage of our income, which was a really great way to compare town by town, rather than simply my tax bill is going up, but as a percentage of your income, how does that actually look, and how does it compare to what's happening in other towns? And someone asked for this to come back, and I went looking for all this data and realized why it hasn't come back and why we unfortunately can't reproduce it. And it's that the average family income number is no longer available through the census. They now give us the median family income, but the median family tax bill is not available anywhere. It's available in Acton. I can get it for us. I have it because I've been tracking it historically, but I can't get Concord or Littleton or any of that, which is too bad, because it was a lovely graph that kind of gave us a trajectory view of our tax bill by year, and then this one was as a percentage of income, how much did our tax bill actually go up? Mm-hmm. So again, I just wanted to speak to it because it was brought up in our last meeting. I spent hours today. I was emailing back and forth with the state, and I can get the per capita information, but I can't get a family number. So.
And whatever we find that can be a changeover, then you also have to be able to backdate.
I have to be able to backdate it to show a story, right? Even if I got today's information, it just is a snapshot of today, and it's really useful historically.
Similarly, I think we want household, not family.
Right? Yes, I agree. What was used, we did family because we had household and family, but we only had family for the tax bill, or there were reasons we made the choices, and we knew at the time that they weren't necessarily the best capture of data, but we can't get any of it together anymore. So I just wanted to put that one to rest.
Somewhere somebody has this type of demographic data.
You would think, but the census stopped reporting it that way.
The census has just never been helpful with data.
Okay.
It seems like
they have the data you don't need.
yeah,
Like
that's
per
the
capita.
impression I get. Okay, so does that wrap up our discussion for the point of view then for this evening? We'll move on to any liaison reports or other new finance committee business. Mr.
So,
Rowland.
I attended the planning board meeting last week via remotely, so the meeting was, and the only thing that was up for discussion was giving an extension on Bumblebee Way, which is that development on High Street. For some portion, they extended it out for a year because he was trying to wrap something up and he was relying on somebody else, but it was nothing major. I did attend the Board of Select Board meeting last night, and I got your update that you sent out today, Adam. The numbers that I had from that meeting last night was that the DPW, they were looking at $585 a square foot. Current facility was built in 1970, needs a roof, doesn't have any insulation. To look at the new one would be, or a new facility for the DPW would be, it'd be solar on the roof, geothermal heating, adaptable for future electrification, which we know is coming. Originally, they were looking at 52,723 square feet. It's been revised down to 47,719. The architect or whatever that firm is that's been hired, I forget the name off the top of my head, Adam might know the name. Remember the name?
Weston and Sampson?
Weston and Sampson met with the Green Advisory Board and, talked about when they design a building, they usually design it for a life expectancy of 50 years, and Green Advisory's like, well, I can't do it for 75 years. Then another one was brought up by several other people in there last night. Ann Chang was one of them. It's like, why are you going to heat the garage at 60 degrees? Can't you just heat it at 50? Diesel, and they talked about diesel and things like that. They talked about maybe radiant floor heating, which might be more efficient, especially for what they're trying to do. It's still in the just talking about what the design is going to incorporate and things like that. So that's going to be an interesting, as they get further into that, to figure out what that is actually going to end up looking like. They are running up against the life expectancy of the storage tanks for the fuel for the police, fire, schools, and the municipal vehicles. That's all pumped out of the same station. It's all in those tanks there, and they're becoming near the end of life. So Weston Sampson says, well, you don't want to end up putting new tanks in and then 2 years down the road have to move those tanks and redo it and move it to a different area. You should do that all at once. Think about where really look at the site, look what the best traffic pattern is going to be, look where that's going to be the best place to go, so that we're not disturbing and have to redo something later on. So in other words, get the design, get everything done ahead of time to know exactly what has to be done, how you can phase that. They said there's no way that you could build a new facility and keep the existing facility running at the same time. So that becomes a different set of circumstances. Where do you put the mechanics? Where do you put the all the trucks that we have now? Where can you store them? We could probably find some space around town to do it. Maybe some of the school property. I don't know, but it's something that they got to work on and take into account.
So my understanding is that the school is going through the exact same process right now. They're maybe not as far ahead as the town is, and you might want to take to your committee next time you meet the subject of talking to the schools about their internal DPW facility, and perhaps at least during the temporary phase, during the building phase, having a co-joint space to maybe save on costs. I did mention that to Dean Charter, but you might want to bring it up again during the committee meeting and see if you can get somebody from, whoever would represent the school.
Maybe we end up leasing the Kmart property and put a big fence around it, and all the vehicles go over there for.
It's nice centrally located.
However long it has to be while they're building new facilities.
It's got a building.
It's got a
It
building.
could work.
I don't know if you can't put either the trucks in there, but you could store some equipment there, and so we throw up a fence around it.
Somebody else floated the idea of using the Grace site, and then it was mentioned to me, well, that's just about as far away from the center of town as you can get. And not really helpful for snowplows and other things, and far from the school as well. So I like the idea of maybe using Kmart.
That's the only thing I could think of. There was somebody else. I thought of another one yesterday. We were at the meeting, and I just drew a blank after that.
And is that the conclusion of your report, or do you have other things?
That is my conclusion. Derek Chin is no longer on planning board anymore.
Okay. Any comments or questions about what Roland presented? Okay, Christine.
So school's not meeting right now, so I don't have a school committee update, but I happen to be following Jamie Eldridge's feed on Facebook and saw that the state has passed through the House, I believe, earmarks, something that has earmarks that includes $200,000 for improvements to Narrow Park, to fix walking bridge and crumbling sidewalks, another $200,000 for the Boston area gleaners at Stonefield Farm. And I know this committee is going to be super excited to hear this. And it hasn't, I don't believe it has passed the state senate yet, but should it pass, $750,000 currently earmarked for restoration of the Asa Parlin House.
Okay, but I don't want to call it the Asa Parlin House anymore.
I was really hoping you were going to say the River Street Dam.
Yes, sorry, David, if I misspoke, please correct anything.
The last one is a federal earmark.
Oh, is it a federal earmark? My bad. There you go.
I would like to point out that our town manager last night during the select board meeting did not refer to it as the Asa Parlin House. He referred to it as the historic building behind town hall. So I think that's headway in telling the truth about the story. So, Roland, go ahead.
It would be nice to put pressure on our state legislature to get money for the dam repair instead of repairing that piece of property.
David Martin has a comment on that.
The grant process is going well. So there are two possible grants. It's looking very favorable for at least one of them.
For the dam?
For the darn on River Street.
And Christine, does that conclude your update? Mr. Noon, do you have anything? Christy, Mr. Majors?
Yeah, just for the record, when we talk about inflation again, we need to keep in mind that the largest population increases in Acton are occurring among the 65-year-old plus population. That population has tripled since 1990. And so if you just do the assumption that their income is fixed, with this record inflation, energy costs, the elderly population or the people over 65 are going to be in real trouble in this town, especially if taxes are increasing, in proportion to inflation and everything else. We got to keep an eye out on for that portion of the population that really won't have the resources to handle these increases. Energy, food, transportation, everything. And their income is like a baseline and it's fixed, and everything else is just going to just swoosh right over them. And so we have to watch out for them in any way we can. That's my comment.
Thank you. David? No comment? Ms. Kingali? Okay, great. I just want to call myself out on something I noticed as I'm going around and calling people's names. I sometimes refer to your first name, sometimes refer to your last name, sometimes I put a Mr. or Mrs. in front. I apologize for the inconsistency. I believe that concludes all of our new and old business for the evening. I will entertain a motion to adjourn, but before we do, I see that Mr. Kedlick is raising his hand. Mr. Kedlick would like to make a comment on the point of view.
The most important part of it was slide 1, bottom line, said you oppose operational override. That to me is the most important element of your point of view. From that, you derive everything else. I mean, unless there is a debt exclusion override, which there may be, but I didn't hear much discussion of it. But assuming there isn't, I can calculate my taxes for the next 5 years. It's 2.5%, maybe 3%, because of the way we don't always use all the tax, available tax, but it's pretty predictable. And inflation does not affect my tax bill. Right? So the purpose of your point of view is to inform the people who make decisions, and that's mostly the school committee, and their big element, which nobody here or anywhere else knows, is the contract with the union, which is about 70% of their budget, and their budget is about 70% of revenue, so it's half the total expense of the town is to be decided by next June. And until that happens, and from what I observed last year or so, there is a likelihood that the school committee will decide we need an override. How much? We can spend time on that, but that's how I go back to the first slide with your bottom line says you post an operational override. Hooray, that's all I need to know.
Mr. Cadlick, thank you for your comments. So I'll just add to that and say, I agree that that's important on the first slide in our first bit of the story to say what we've already voted and said. So we'll make sure that gets in there. With that, are there any other comments or pieces of business before we take a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn the meeting.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those abstain, or all those against, say nay. And any abstentions? We are adjourned.